2, 1.
Welcome in. It's the Husker Extra podcast. That's Sipple. I'm Parker. We are without our esteemed colleague, Chris Basnet, this week. He's out doing what a young man does. He'll be back next week.
Doing what a young man does, and all that entails.
There's a bunch of young men doing what young football players do over on campus. Sipple, first week of Nebraska spring ball in the books. It's late. I had a day. I was at the car dealership all day. It's 5:50, almost 5:51 right now on Friday. Depending on when you're listening to this podcast, it's Friday evening. Friday morning, Nebraska had its first spring practice in pads. It's the end of the first week of work for those guys. They got 3, official practices in so far. And this is basically the way it's going to go this spring. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. May see a couple of those Friday practices on Saturday, depending on, sort of what they're trying to get done. But this is it. Without spring break in the UNL academic calendar this year, they've got 5 uninterrupted weeks. First week's over now, all the way through April, leading up to Saturday, May 1st, which of course will be the red-white spring game. We were over there actually on Wednesday, Sipple, not to see any of practice, but to conduct some interviews in person for the first time in a year. What have we learned in the first week of spring ball?
Well, a lot. I mean, I think my biggest takeaway from week 1 were Sean Beckton's comments about special teams. I hate to start with sort of a kind of a negative.
It's a reality though, right? I mean,
Sean Beckton is the tight ends coach, but he just flat out said he expressed disappointment with the way they coached special teams last year. He basically said we didn't give it the attention we needed to. Now, I don't know what all that means, but a lot of people were sort of taken aback by it.
Yeah, it's a pretty alarming sentiment to hold, isn't it? Like, I mean, you could say anytime you don't get the results you want, clearly you needed to be better in some way, but for him to say that in the way he said it, I took that as a holy shit moment, kind of like, wow.
It was to a lot of people. Now you can dress it up in a very acceptable way by saying, well, they've assessed it and now they're gonna do better.
Sure.
So that's a positive. But here's the thing, Parker, it's year 4.
Right.
I mean,
that's what struck me about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and this has been an ongoing conversation. If you look, for instance, at the ESPN Power Index that rates special teams play, Nebraska was 115th last year and 120th the year before. I don't know where they were in Frost's first year, but I don't remember their special teams being particularly strong. So this is an ongoing conversation. When he said that, it's hard to know what to make of it, except, I mean, we can clearly, the staff didn't jibe with Jonathan Rutledge, who was the special teams analyst.
Yes.
It didn't work out, so that was the one thing that struck me. What else, Parker?
Yeah. One of the things that struck me in that same conversation is the clear and obvious respect that those same coaches, Sean Beckton and Travis Fisher in particular, have for Mike Dawson, who now is the special teams coordinator in addition to being the outside linebackers coach. I mean, they both talked in detail about supporting Mike Dawson and making it clear in their respective rooms. And the tight ends and the defensive backs are very important in the special teams. That's the body type you need a lot of in special teams. Tight ends, DBs, linebackers, that fills out a lot of your special teams cores typically. And so that, those guys talking about the importance of it, Travis Fisher said flatly, doesn't matter if you're a walk-on or a scholarship guy in his room, the rule is you have to start on at least one special teams unit. And he said, if you can't start on one special teams unit, you cannot play defensive back here, period. So that's That's a good thing to say in late March, early April. It's a sentiment that you want to see carried all the way through and result in improvement because they have to improve. I mean, Travis Fisher said it. He said it's not hard to get my guys to buy into special teams because they've watched it and they understand that it's been the difference between wins and losses at some point, which is great. It begs the question, why hasn't it gotten better sooner, as you sort of said? But at the same time, like all you can do, the past is the past. All you can do is try to get better going forward. That's the only option. So special teams, definitely a dominant conversation. I thought that Greg Austin was very interesting talking about the mix of guys who will be competing for playing time in his room. There's some guys that you would expect, Brant Banks being one of them, Trent Hickson. I've sort of had this thought that Trent Hickson's going to be an important guy in that group, and Greg Austin said as much. Right now, he's the number 2 center, and he's competing for a guard job. So he's going to be a swing. He can play all 3 inside. But a couple new-ish names popped in there too. Nori Newelli, the walk-on transfer from Colorado State who got here last year. Some people know his story. He's a exchange student from Germany and was in Norris and then turned himself into a Division I football player very quickly. And Ezra Miller, walk-on from Iowa. So those 2 guys are in the mix there. And it's going to be interesting to see, if the 4 guys who we sort of think of as something like presumptive starters, Turner Corcoran, Ethan Piper, Cam Jurgens, and Bryce Bennett, hang on to those jobs and accelerate their development paths, and then also who rounds out the starting 5 and who provides sort of the first depth off the bench.
Yeah, well, exactly. Now, the reason we're talking about special teams and offensive line is partly because those were the coaches that were available. Sean Beckton was available. And by the way, we did in-person interviews for the first time in over a year.
Yeah, it was awesome.
At the state. Yeah, at the state. It was really, you don't I mean, I guess there's some good things about the pandemic. It took away some things that you maybe took for granted. Like those in-person interviews at the stadium, it was so much easier to get information. And it worked out really well. So Sean Beckton was available, Greg Austin was available, Travis Fisher was available, and Mike Dawson was available. So that's why we're talking a lot of offensive line and special teams. But now, Parker, I want to say this. I can't remember the special teams discussion at Nebraska being this sort of intense.
Right.
This much scrutiny. Not very often in 30 years that I've been around here. I mean,
interesting.
It's for a long time they were really good at special teams. The Pelini era, they struggled some, but he kind of righted the ship. Mm-hmm. But I didn't feel like it ever got as much discussion as this.
Well, I mean, think about it.
We're really talking about it a lot. What? Go ahead.
Yeah, the last 2 years, I mean, they've lost to Iowa by 3 points and by 6 points. And they've given up a kick return touchdown in both of those games. Like, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see. And that's like before you get to the hidden yards, when you have maybe a punt that's not a great one. Yeah. Or, you don't get anything on a return, or you punt it from the midfield and it goes into the end zone. Like there's all sorts of subtle things in special teams that are easy to overlook, but we're not even talking about like subtle things. And they've just given up these sort of like catastrophic failures.
Failure, like kicking the ball to Aaron Cruikshank and allowing him to run 98 yards in a straight line. straight line. How often do you see that?
Yeah, right. Or blocking a punt against Penn State, turning it into a touchdown, and then having a punt blocked in the same half.
Almost having another one blocked, by the way.
Almost having another
later
one.
in the game. Yeah. I always tell people, I hope you don't mind, the one thing that I've noticed about watching games with you that drives you crazy is the kickoff return short of the 25. That drives you, and I totally understand. It's funny because I'd always, there was a time I was like, big deal. They got to the 18. That's fine. It's not though. If you do
Right.
that 4 times a game, that's 20 yards that you
Yeah.
lost.
And it's a new, but it's my intolerance for it has accelerated in recent years because of the rule change. It used to be like if the ball didn't land in the end zone, you had to bring it, you had to return it. But now you can fair catch that thing and they'll just literally give it to you at the 25.
Mm-hmm.
If someone hits a beautiful kick and it's way up there and it's gonna hit at the 6, you don't have to run that back anymore. You used to have to return that. Now you don't. You can put your hand up and call it, and they give it to you at the 25. There's no excuse for catching, fielding it at the 4, let alone bringing it out of the end zone and getting tackled short of the 25. You are just literally giving away yardage.
Right. There you go.
Here, take it. Take it.
Right. It drives you nuts. But I understand it. I mean, because
it's a detail of the game. It's a detail that has no upside. There's no upside to it. You just take it at the 25 and let it go. And if you have a dangerous return man or you have someone who you trust to advance it past the 25, then if you're regularly running it out to the 33 or the 35, and every once in a while you get stopped at the 22, that's fine. But that is not the case with Nebraska. It hasn't been in recent years. It's not like they're rolling the dice and gaining yardage 3 out of 4 times, and then on the 4th time when they bring it out, they get stopped a little short. That's fine. You can deal with that. But it's like they're not getting to the 25 and they're getting stopped short of that sometimes. It's just like as if it's not like that they're just then saying, oh, well, our offense is so overwhelming that we'll make up for it.
Mm-hmm.
It just
no, there's not. So they have, I think there's some of the another reason why the special teams discussion is so prevalent is because I think I don't know if people think, maybe I think of it this way, Parker. The defense has 9 returning starters and it's pretty good.
Yeah.
If you can get the special teams going at a reasonably high level, the schedule is rough. You have 3 of the first 4 games on the road as it is now. Maybe if you're playing good defense and good special teams, it gives some new guys on that offense a chance to kind of work their way in and get things right, find a groove. And then everything maybe starts clicking in all 3 phases, which is, we haven't seen that at all. But I think the defense and special teams could give a guy like Samari Toure and Marquise Stepp time to kind of find their footing.
Right.
And, we've seen, like we saw with Dedrick Mills, he needed time. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe Marquise Stepp won't, but I mean, I don't know if those guys will be ready just to come in off the jump and run for 100 yards and catch 7 passes for 120. I don't know. Right. We'll see.
I didn't plan on spending the first 15 minutes of this podcast talking about special teams, but I have another thought on it. Yeah. And that is, I think that one of the things that frustrates fans about the special teams conversation too is this. I don't have data to back this up, but it's a feeling that I have. And Mike Dawson was sort of like picking at it a little bit on Wednesday when he talked. And he said the thing that he learned from Dave Phipp, who ran special teams for the Philadelphia Eagles for a long time, is that special teams by and large is about technique and detail. Fundamentals. Yeah. Fundamentals. Technique and fundamentals. And it's much less about scheme. And that sort of, it hit on something that I've thought for a long time, which is that when you think about teams that are good in special teams, they almost always, not always, sometimes you have a return man who's so dynamic or a kicker who's so good or whatever that you can cover up some warts. But typically, teams that are good on special teams year in and year out are teams who are good in the details. They're the kind of teams who, in the lead up to the game, coaches say things like they don't beat themselves, they're really sound, they're buttoned up. It's teams like Iowa, like Northwestern, like Wisconsin. And that's something that by and large is within your control. That's the thing that I think frustrates people about it, is like, you don't have to be overwhelmingly talented to be
Right.
solid on special teams. You just have to be buttoned up and organized and understand and drill the fundamentals and technique more than having some elaborate scheme. And so it's just this question of like, why can't it be good? There's really no excuse for it not to be at least solid.
Well, and there's another part of the discussion I've heard from coaches for years, and it makes a lot of sense, but it's not a good look. This discussion is not a good look for Scott's program. That in any organization, be it a football program or the Journal Star or Casey's General Store or whatever, you're looking if you're looking at the culture, you're looking at how are the workers doing the little things all the time? Are the employees that aren't real high profile, are they happy and productive? Are they working at a high level? That's where you assess a business, to see that, not necessarily at the top. Not it's look at a few layers down.
Right.
And if that's working at a high level, then your business is probably pretty good. And that's a little bit damning for Nebraska football right now. And it's I think it's disappointing to a lot of people. And even if they don't think about it like exactly like that, I think they sort of get that,
Right.
know. And then the other thing, Sam McCune pointed out something in the World Herald I thought was really interesting. It makes a lot of sense. Nebraska has 155 players, which I don't think there's many programs in the country that have that many players. Maybe none.
No, it's one of the biggest. If it's not the biggest roster, it's one of the biggest.
Yeah. So you can't find out of those 155 a bunch of guys that want to be killers on special teams. So that's why I think this discussion has sort of ramped up, because people realize that. Now Scott Parker has had a chance to build the walk-on program.
Right.
There's literally no excuse now not to have good special teams unless it's not being coached well. And that winds back to what Sean Beckton said. It's on us. Sean Beckton said the words, it is on us. It's not on the kids.
Yeah.
They have the guys. It's on the it's on the coaching. That's why we're really looking at it now.
Yeah, and there's it can get better. It can get, special teams is an area that can get better quickly too. I think that's another reason why it's interesting, especially with Mike Dawson, who has a good reputation in the department, sort of taking over that now. It's not like it was all doom and gloom week one. The first week of spring is typically it's a pretty it's a pretty hopeful time and optimistic time for programs, in large part because you're getting work in, you're back on the field, you've had some time off, and the season's a long way away and all that. So there's some things that will just be interesting to watch going forward. I think back to Monday, Matt Lubick talking and Scott Frost talking about Samori Toure operating maybe primarily out of the slot as a 6'3" guy. Think about, Cameron Jurgens talking about leadership and taking the bull by the horn sort of in that department. You think about just Scott Frost saying, Logan Smothers and Heinrich Harburg and Matt Masker are going to get a ton of reps this spring. All things that we'll explore more over the next 4 weeks. And I think we're going to maybe hear from the quarterbacks, Mario Varisco, the quarterbacks coach, Adrian, maybe a couple of the other quarterbacks on Monday. So there's a lot, I think there's a lot of interesting things to watch this spring, a lot of interesting things to write about and chat about at the water cooler and all of it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I thought what Frost said about Samori Toure, not only playing in the slot, but also the way he's approached his work like a veteran.
Yeah.
He's come in, and Scott's been really impressed by his demeanor, his approach to his work. All that suggests Samori Toure has a good chance to trot out there with the first string. Plus the fact Parker caught 87 passes in 2019. Is that right?
Yes.
87 passes in 2019 for Montana. He was an FCS All-American. Yeah. So he's an FCS All-American. I don't mind talking about a guy like that as much in because he's done it. I mean,
Right.
he's not at the Big Ten level, but an FCS All-American suggests some talent and some, well, I mean, it just suggests a certain skill level. So, yeah, and putting him in the slot's really interesting at 6'3" and 190.
Yeah, especially, I mean, this is probably for a next one, especially, we'll talk to some of these guys, I think, over the next week. But one of the things that I think is really interesting is when you look at the wide receiver group and maybe contrast it with the secondary group. I mean, think about what you're talking about. If you make a list of, say, like 6 or 7 guys that you might think is sort of the top group or a starting point for the top group for the receivers. Like Samari Toure just got here in January. Xavier Betts, 1 year in the program, 2020, bizarre year. Omar Manning, 1 year in the program. Oliver Martin, 1 year in the program. Alante Brown, 1 year in the program. Will Nixon, 1 year in the program and spent it rehabbing from a knee injury that he suffered in July. Levi Falk, 1 year in the program. Like, all of these guys were at best first-year players last year during a bizarre year all around. And that's why you heard Matt Lubick and Scott Frost counsel patience with that group. And I think it gives you an idea of why they're so optimistic about that group. That doesn't mean anything, doesn't guarantee anything, but it's an interesting group because they all got this year that didn't count against eligibility or whatever. And then Toure is the one guy who they're sort of thrusting into the mix, as a first-year player in the program. But this is sort of like, okay, dress rehearsal's over, let's see what you can do. And I just find it to be a very interesting group, especially when you hear things like Oliver Martin, had a 40-inch vertical and is one of the more athletic guys in that room. Like, they've got some guys in that room now, and they're gonna have to figure out how to deploy them and who rises to the top, because they've got some ability. Now it's about turning that ability into production.
Well, Parker, I don't know if this is what you're started. I don't know if this was the road you're starting down, or if I'm just finishing it. But think about what we're talking about with the receivers and all those guys that are 1 year in the program at best, what they're going against in practice a lot of the time.
Yeah,
which is guys like Markel Dismuke, and who's been in the program 6 years, 5 years.
This is his sixth. This is his sixth.
Dante Williams. He's been in the program how many years?
This is Deontay Williams, who's a junior college transfer. This is 4th year in the program now.
Right. Cam Taylor Britt, same.
Yep.
And then not just the defensive backfield. I mean, throughout the defense, they're going against Ben Stilley, who's a 6-year guy. So it's an interesting. I mean, I would think the defense would have kind of an advantage in that situation. So that's an interesting dynamic. There's a lot. Parker, a lot of people don't get this, but unfortunately, we don't see these practices.
Right.
I mean, this is an example. I always want to see them, but this year in particular, I would love to see what's going on over there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fascinating. All this stuff we're talking about is really, really interesting. And you frame it up against you frame it up in the context of Frost. It's a big year for him. It's a big spring. It's going into we always talk about the magnitude of the opener against Illinois. And I hope if we went over there, what you would see is urgency. That's because I think this program needs that right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating spring, and that, then I guess the last thing to wrap up this part of the podcast would be, I think one of the things that maybe, I don't know that we wrote a ton about it last year, Sipple, and part of it's just because it was a weird year. The season went by really fast, and the secondary played pretty well, all things considered. Veteran group, they had the 3 seniors, and DiCaprio left, and after the season, obviously, and Cam Taylor Britt sort of ascended into that role as their top corner. But they had a lot of injuries in the secondary last year. Braxton Clark missed the whole season with a shoulder injury. Javen Wright missed the whole season with a knee injury. Miles Farmer went down, in early December against Purdue. Badab Joseph wasn't even eligible until part of the way through the season. started to get some work on special teams and then got hurt against Purdue. I mean, Noah Pola Gates has been sort of oft injured through his career and was dealt with stuff last year. And so you have all these guys who now suddenly, not all of them are 100%, turned all the way loose in spring this year as they're coming back from injuries. But for a group that has on paper just the one job open, a cornerback spot opposite Cam Taylor-Britt, there's a lot of guys who are sort of knocking on the door in that room. And I think, like in baseball this year, you're hearing a lot about, hey, we had a shortened season last year and it's going to take a lot of guys to work through a full-length season this year. I think you're going to hear similar things in the secondary. It might be better for Deontay Williams and Markel Dismuke if they're not asked to play 1,000 snaps in 2021, every
Maybe.
snap.
Oh, no. Yeah, I mean, I think if you're Frost and the defensive staff, you have to think about the future too. I mean,
yeah,
you're going to lose a lot of firepower off that defense, including in the secondary. And you got to a certain extent, get guys ready.
Right.
I think. I mean, there's a balance. That's a tricky conversation. But
yeah, you can't afford to have a huge drop off, for two
Right.
series when you're playing against Iowa. But you also, he talked about Eric Schnatter talked on Monday about, JoJo Doman held up fine playing every snap and special teams over an 8-game season. But are we doing right by him if we ask him to do that for 12 or 13 games? That's who can find that role, who can get to in Travis Fisher's ear and say, hey, look, I've shown it. You've got to put me on the field. I've earned it. That's going to be an interesting conversation back in that second.
Yep. Yeah. Well, here's the other thing though. You can't have a huge drop off from year 4 to year 5 either. I mean, so that Parker, that job of head coach is a complicated one.
Yep, it is. Among the head coach's job, some head coaches do it more than others. Scott Frost pretty involved in it, is recruiting. Should we talk about recruiting for a couple minutes? Yeah,
well, they had 2 significant bits of news in the last 2 days, so yes.
Yeah. Yesterday, Thursday, Nebraska landed just as far, like from Parker's perspective, just a clear out of the blue commitment, bolt from the heavens commitment from a wide receiver named Victor Jones Jr. But Victor. He was not a surprise to the coaching staff. He's from Orlando, Nebraska. Scott Frost has known who he is, and Sean Beckton's known who he is since he was in middle school. Olympia High, he's a receiver, 6'2". He has verified track times, sub 11 in the 100 meters and 22 flat in the 200. I mean, this kid that can really run, and he's 6'2", average 19 yards a catch as a junior. He's a guy that Nebraska's thought highly of for a long time, just not really on like the recruiting scene very much. And so I had literally no idea who he was.
Well, yeah, he's got you talking in the third person, so he must be fairly good.
Yeah. Exactly. See, that's how surprising Victor Jones Jr.'s commitment was.
Yeah, it was interesting that way. It happens, as you alluded to it, I think in your 3 takeaways. During the pandemic, it's happening a little more. Some of those commitments kind of come from nowhere-ish, right?
Yeah, and I named a couple of them in the story. Patrick Payton was like that, and then obviously he ended up decommitting and going to Florida State. And Gabe Ervin was like that. Like, I knew that they were recruiting Gabe Ervin, so at least that it was a little bit different in that way. But one day I was like scrolling through Twitter, and it was like Gabe Ervin's announcing his commitment in 3 minutes. Watch the video, and I was like, I think Nebraska might be recruiting this guy. Maybe I should just take a couple minutes and watch this. And then he put on a Nebraska hat, and I was like, "Whoa!"
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
I was in California. I was at my fiance's parents' house and sitting in the backyard scrolling through. I was like, "Oh, Gabe Ervin's. That's weird."
What time of year was this? What time of year was it?
So it was like June last year.
Oh, I was probably on the hog. I was probably riding around.
And then his teammate. Then it was like his teammate Malik Williams. I talked to Malik Williams the next day. And he's like, "Yeah, I'll probably commit in a couple weeks." It's like, "Oh, okay." So that one, at least I was on, but no,
Well, Victor Jones, I mean, Victor Jones was being recruited by people, West
right.
Virginia. Who else? West Virginia. Who else in the Big Ten?
Central Florida. There's a couple Big Ten teams involved.
Louisville.
Yeah.
Louisville.
Yeah. So I thought, you know what it reminded me of, Sipple, was it reminded me of when Sean Hardy, the receiver from Georgia, committed last year. Because it was like, upon talking to Sean Hardy, just like upon talking to Victor Jones, very clear that this was not just like, I need to secure my spot, so I'm going to commit. I mean, this guy knows a lot about Nebraska. He's known the coaching staff for a long time. Sean Beckton has ties to the head coach at Olympia. Victor Jones's head coach, Travis Gabriel. They've known each other for a long time. I think he coached his brother or something like that at UCF. So this is a guy who has known Nebraska. Nebraska's known him for a long time. They really like him. They think he's going to be a big play threat as a receiver. And he's just another now in a long and growing line of big receivers, the type of receivers that you like, Simple, that would have you talking in the third person about, being
well,
6'2" or 6'3", long arms, that kind of guy.
Right. Listen, I have nothing against a dude like Wan'Dale Robinson. You know that. I was a big Wan'Dale fan. But in this league and just over the years, I've noticed teams come in here going back to the Solich era. I would see teams like Texas, even Kansas State, Parker, would come in and in warmups, you'd see these receivers that are all 6'2", 6'3", 6'4" thoroughbreds. And then you look at Nebraska and they didn't have them.
Right.
And I do think Frost came into this situation, saw the Big Ten and realized we gotta look like those teams.
Yeah.
And I've always thought catch radius was big too. And I think at 5'8", 5'9", there's a lot of routes you just get lost. And if you're streaking down the field at 6'3", you're just less apt to get lost.
Yeah.
It's not anything. I don't have anything against smaller receivers. I mean, I watch Tyreek Hill. I know what guys like that are capable of, but I just think you need to fill your roster with. I mean, Nebraska got to a point where it was too small at receiver.
Yeah.
Parker, during the games, I'd have guys texting me and saying, "Simple, what's the deal? Why are they so small at the receiver position?"
Yeah.
Anyway, Victor Jones is big in that conversation, and so is the kid from Pierce.
Yeah. So speaking of catch radius, Ben Bramer becomes the first commit in the 2023 class this afternoon, Friday afternoon. And he's a guy who, man, I mean, when you call around and ask people about Benjamin Bramer, you hear nothing but rave reviews. He's 6'6". He's 190 pounds right now. His dad, Mark Pierce, is the head coach at Mark Bramer has been the head coach at Pierce for 25 years. Said he's still growing. In college, he's going to be 6'6" or 6'7" and 235 or 240 pounds. He's worked out at the Warren Academy for a long time. I talked to Steve Warren today, and Steve Warren said, "Yeah, I've known about him for years, and he's just gotten better and better." And he said, "You know what I do, Parker? When a college calls, I say, 'Did you like Thomas Fidone? Because if you like Thomas Fidone, you better recruit Ben Bramer.'" He said he's way more polished than Fidone was when he's a sophomore. Fidone made a massive jump, turned himself into an elite prospect. So there's no guarantee that that's going to happen with Ben Bramer, but he's a guy who's polished. He's got good movement skills. He can run. He looks like a wide receiver right now in his development arc. He's just a sophomore in high school, so he's got a lot of high school ball left, but he's a guy who Nebraska is really high on, and who I think the recruiting industry would be higher on already if he wasn't playing C1 ball in Nebraska and had there not been a dead period for the past 14 months. But I tend to think, just in the people I've talked to, not just today, but since Nebraska offered him the past month or so, in the past month or 6 weeks, he's going to be a guy that a lot of people in the Midwest know the name in the recruiting circles before it's all said and done. And that aspect of it will probably actually be hurt a little bit by the fact that he committed early. He's an in-state guy.
Yeah.
He might not Northwestern might not come in and offer him a scholarship. Wisconsin might not come in and offer him a scholarship if he's been committed to Nebraska for a year already. But
Yeah, he's only a sophomore. I mean, he's
yeah.
a sophomore who made 44 catches, I think, for 747 yards. And this was, it was the state. He was playing on a state championship team. The team beat Adams Central. The other thing, Parker, that people that have followed the program will be interested in is that he's the first scholarship recruit from Pierce since Matt Herring, which you had in your story. Herring was a great player.
Yeah,
I mean, Parker. The guy would have fit any era, would have fit here beautifully. He was one of the best tight ends to ever play here. You know what? This kid kind of, I'm not going to put it on him, but this kid evokes images of Matt Herring, because Matt Herring was a tight end who was a big time deep threat because he could run.
Yeah.
And he caught a lot of deep passes at a time when Nebraska didn't throw them very often.
Yep.
But Matt Herring is a Pierce legend. I mean, he's a legend in Pierce. Yep. So it's really, from that standpoint, this is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
They got another 6'5" guy that can stretch the field from Pierce that will evoke images of Matt Herring.
Yep. And obviously he's the first guy in the boat for the 2023 class. And so he'll be probably around a lot as camps get going and all of that. He'll be a guy that'll be a leader in that class. And Nebraska's already got 3 scholarship offers out in the 2023 class in state. Bramer, who obviously is committed now. Maverick Noonan, another legacy player from Elkhorn South. And then Tony Tuioti's kid at Lincoln Southeast. A couple more right in the region that have Power 5 offers as it stands. Gunnar Gatula also at Southeast. And then there's a couple kids just right over the border in Western Iowa that are clear Power 5 kids too. So it's a good group. Steve Warren said today it's not the last you're going to hear of the sophomore group around here because he thinks it's really good. There's some guys that he thinks is on the cusp of becoming Power 5 type recruits. So recruiting never stops. You just think it's been quiet for a little while, and then suddenly, 2 days in a row, Nebraska picks up a commit. So some activity on that, sure to be more over the rest of the spring, and obviously into the summer. It's warming back up a little bit on that front, Sipple.
You can't even go to lunch. Some kid commits.
No, we got it done.
Hey, so who's your Final Four? Who's your national champion, Parker?
I'm going to go way, way, way out on a limb.
Yeah,
say Gonzaga.
Yeah, I think it's. I don't know how many experts would try to dissuade you on that. I'm clearly an expert, and I would never dissuade you on that.
If Baylor's guards really come to play, they can make it a game. But Gonzaga's so good.
Don't you think Houston could make it a game?
Yeah, they're pretty rugged. That's gonna be a war. I mean, Baylor and Houston is gonna be a war.
It will. Yeah, Houston. I really like the way they play. They attack. I mean, they attack. For instance, they send 5 to the boards, and they are dogs on the board. Yeah, you're right. Houston Baylor is an absolute war. I don't think UCLA can be a real threat to Gonzaga. UCLA is a great story, though. I mean, that's an amazing run they've had.
Yeah, I know.
All right, you got lunch or dinner to eat. So
you should eat dinner too at some point. It's healthy for you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's time. I'll go for a little hog ride and then have some barbecue.
Man, pork all around. Sounds good.
Yeah.
That is all for this week. We've got a ton of stuff from the first week of spring ball and all the recruiting news and all of that up right now on HuskerExtra.com. Got more coming this weekend. And then we're back to it with week 2 of spring ball next week. Monday and Wednesday, we'll be over there doing interviews, and we'll have content all week. So check HuskerExtra.com. Consider subscribing. You can get 12 months of full digital access to the Journal Star for $29.99 right now. Full year.
Yeah, that seems like a
full year for $30. You should do it.
Yeah, I mean, this podcast was worth $30.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah, 30.
All right. We'd really appreciate your support in that regard. Check HuskerX.com for all the latest, and thanks for watching.